everybody, and welcome to the St. Louis chapter, the IIBA. As Bob alluded to, my name is Michelle Green. I'm the chapter president. A little housekeeping before we get started. For any questions regarding the IIBA, the St. Louis chapter, or really just anything BA related, feel free to reach out to me via email at president@stlouis.iiba.org. This webinar is registered with the IIBA. It qualifies for 1.5 CDUs. The chapter will be emailing certificates of attendance out to everybody, including the course codes, within the next couple days. And now we're going to kick off our training series all about Agile. We're very pleased to be able to present our speaker, Bob Prentice, or Bob the BA, as he's more commonly known as in the BA community. Bob provides badass business analysis training, consulting, and mentoring services. He is CBAP certified with 25+ years experience in corporate America, with a background in managing BA centers of excellence, assessing and managing BA maturity, quality, and competency. He's presented numerous keynote workshops, seminars, conferences, and training sessions across North America, and is a founding member and past president of the IIBA Minneapolis-St. Paul chapter. Welcome, Bob.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thanks, everyone, for having me. So let's do a quick little shout out to make sure that everyone can both see the screen and hear me using your question pane, your panel down below, and just type in a question saying you can hear and see me. Not physically, of course, but you can see the screen. And so I've got a yes, and I can hear and see ya. I love that. All right, awesome. So what we're going to do for our discussion as we get into this, because we will have discussion points, I'm going to have you use the question panel. And as questions come in, then I will make sure that they get sent back out to everyone. This will allow us to send in private comments if you need to prior to that, or I will make them public if it's a question that pertains to everyone. So my style is pretty informal. Throw the questions in whenever you want to. And we've got plenty of time for Q&A as we go through this process tonight. And we're here to talk about the Agile BA. What is a business analyst do anyway in the Agile environment? This is actually a class that I provide, and it's a topic that is of great importance to many organizations around the world because everyone's Agile these days, right? So, and if you're not Agile today, your company, I guarantee you, at the management level is thinking about it. Everyone is thinking about it on some level or doing it on some level. Some companies are literally trying to go 100% Agile. Not probably a great idea, but you know, we're going to do like what we always do with our projects. We'll experiment, we'll see if we can get better. So tonight I want to talk about how the BA fits into Agile overall. And as Michelle mentioned, the webinar is registered, so I put that in there just in case we had some technical difficulties, but we're all good there. You guys know that it's registered and you can get your credits for it. So is the role of the business analyst dead? That's a question that I would like to ask each and every one of you, because certainly if you believe what I will call Agile purists from the development perspective, they don't usually like to talk about the BA. Now, I remember the very first time I attended a conference where an Agile speaker was talking about Agile being the wave of the future, and them telling the entire audience, which was mostly BAs, that there was no future for business analysts, that business analysts were not needed. So what do you guys think? Do you think the role of the BA is dead? Do you think it's dying? Chime in on that question panel. What do you think? All right, so we got one person saying no, it's expanded. Got another no. Oh, I love this. We got a heck no. Heck no is good. All right, none, not dead. So I agree with you. I don't think that it's dead either. I think it's changing, and I think that's what we have to understand. Love the comments coming in, guys. This is where we make it interactive virtually, right? BAs are needed more than ever. All right, more crucial role than ever. I would agree with you, Cliff. BAs still have a role. BAs need to be strategic. Absolutely, David. Huge future for BAs. And here's a great comment coming in from Dan. I don't know, it's hard to define an Agile. Project teams can't live without BAs in Agile, but the role is different from Agile team to Agile team. Absolutely correct, Dan. And that's a struggle most companies are going through. And I've taught this particular class, this is a 2-day version that I do, at 2 different companies in the last month using completely different approaches to Agile. And in both cases, they're going to be using the BA role differently. So the role isn't dead. And just to reinforce that, here's some reasons why the BA role will never die. The ever elusive, it doesn't matter how well you design it, the requirements, just got to be there in some fashion. I do want to go back to a question here too. Sheila's hearing that. I hear BAs will become more like technical PMs. Definitely something to explore on that one. Another reason why BAs are sorely needed, someone clearly got fired over this. The dreaded 1312 t-shirt. I'd be bummed if I received that as a child. This one, of course, now I like this one because some nerd didn't get stuffed in a locker that summer, which I think is pretty cool. And yes, Sheila, I agree because of the new SAFe methodology that's coming out, and that's pretty new. Superman, is it Spider-Man? And actually, if you look in the background here, you can see there's Power Rangers. So we have Power Ranger background, Superman title, and Spider-Man packaging. Very confusing to be a child without good requirements. This is one of my favorites. I call this the thinking man's requirements. I actually have a friend, she and her husband are both sight challenged, and they have 2 children that are the same way, and she teaches people basically to be blind. This would drive her insane. She would be very, very angry. All right, so here's the deal. The BA role is evolving, and the BA role will continue to evolve. And even though Sheila mentioned the whole SAFe methodology, which is pretty new out there, it's yet another attempt at trying to figure out how to do projects well. It's not going to kill the role of the BA. It's not going to change a lot of the BAs. It's going to be one methodology out of hundreds that have occurred over the years. And this is what most people don't realize is that methodology comes and goes quite frequently. And in fact, did you guys know that there's already 15 different versions of Agile? 15. And that's because it's being customized every time you turn around. And if you looked at waterfall, how many different ways are there to customize waterfall? A gazillion. So our role isn't dying, but we have to stay on top of it. And that's why you guys are here, to talk about, to learn. So here's the deal. Einstein said a long time ago, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And this is one of the things that BAs bring to the table. All right. We look at it differently. We think differently. We learn differently. We work differently. And that's why methodology doesn't bother me so much. It's just about understanding how I'm going to help solve the problem, because that's what BAs do. We're problem solvers. We're leaders. And I will tell you guys adamantly, I wish we would remove the terms Agile and Waterfall from our language, because I think they only serve to confuse people. These are simply approaches to get our work done, and I don't think we have to label them. And by labeling them, we tend to end up labeling ourselves. I don't think that does anyone a good service. But that's a topic for another time. So Scrum. Scrum, probably the most accepted and known form of Agile. Scrum being the daily stand-up. Scrum being identified because we will all work together cooperatively in a stand-up every day. Although I can't think of a worse way to start the day if I was in a Scrum that looked like this. To me, it's always been mind-boggling that they adopted that term, simply because it's not really attractive, no matter how you look at it. All right, so moving forward, here's why we need to change. Let's look at some facts and figures that have been captured over the years. When we go all the way back to 1998, we had 28% of our projects failing, 46% challenge, and only 26% succeeding. So we've been changing, and methodology has been moving from a waterfall environment, right, into an agile environment, and we've been noticing that the numbers have gone up. We are succeeding more than we have before. We're not failing as much. Notice the challenge numbers haven't moved a whole lot. And I don't think the challenge numbers are ever really going to move a whole lot. I don't see those ever really going down. I see the failing moving up to the succession level more, but we are always going to be challenged by our projects. And that's why we constantly evolve, whatever the methodology du jour is at the moment. And hopefully we find better ways to do what we need to do. Another reason why Agile came about, and if you guys aren't aware of this, Agile's not new. Agile's been around since the 50s in Japan, and it's been around for a very, very long time. It's just now catching on globally. But when we go back to our classic way of doing things with a waterfall, incremental, or iterative approach, we end up with a ton of features and functions that actually aren't used. And what's the reason for that? Why would we end up with so many functions and features not used after we deliver them from a waterfall or incremental approach? Chime in for me. What do you think the reason is? Use that question panel. For the new attendees that did not get here at the beginning, use the question panel to chime in with anything you would like to share. So Sue, and if I'm not pronouncing your name right, I apologize, says that the environments have changed. Yes, environments have changed. Business needs have changed overall, absolutely. We were taking too long to develop. End users changing their mind, yes. And so because they changed their mind, by the time we get to launch, which was another comment, taking too long to launch, we don't have the right need identified anymore, right? So we end up developing things incorrectly, right? Long project timelines as well. And so this is why Agile has a lot of attraction. I'm going to sneeze live. Or not. I guess I'm not going to sneeze now. That's what you always know when you're live in the moment. Something's going to happen, right? Stakeholders want more sooner, another reason that came in. Absolutely correct. And thank you for the bless you, much appreciated. So Agile has a place, and Agile can do great things when we know how to use the roles. And as a result, we will have fewer capabilities and functions not being used. We should have more of what we call minimal viable product that's actually needed and being used in the moment. So if we look at the overall success factors that have been tracked over the last several years, you will notice that Agile is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the process for contributing to higher success ratios. You'll also notice that scope optimization, emotional maturity, objectives, user involvement, very big on the list. And I would say a BA is heavily involved with those and in fact is best suited compared to other roles. So they don't label business analysis out specifically. And I think that's because this profession is still hard to label. If we look at how far we've come since the beginning of IIBA in 2003, and I was around back then, involved, and I started the Minneapolis-St. Paul chapter in 2005. We've come a long way with trying to define business analysis, but most of it actually revolves around people and other things. So it's hard to define, sometimes calling that business analysis. I've got another comment coming in here. I find that I try to use tools that will help us, but there is no time to vet them out and fully and realize the usefulness of them. It's hard, yeah. There's not enough time to do everything. And honestly, that's true whether you're in Agile or Waterfall. And this is where we have to get smarter about what we do, which is really, easy for me to say as a disembodied voice up in Minnesota. By the way, I'm from Minnesota, for those of you who don't know. But we can find ways to get smarter about how we use them. And we do need to then change the cultures we work in to get them to hopefully let us use the right tools. That will help. So more on that in a bit. So I want to take a brief tour down the Agile lane. Another great comment coming in. Don't shy away from the comments, guys. Keep them coming because this is how we interact. Some stakeholders are afraid to let go, the fear of change. Absolutely correct, right? Agile is a big deal when we put it in front of people because they're like, oh, the sky is falling and why should we have to do something different? Well, because we're failing the other ways we're doing it. So I want to take a brief history about what pure Agile is supposed to be about before we talk about what the BA can do in Agile. So we'll start with the dictionary. The Agile definition is the ability to move quickly and easily. So makes sense, right? And Agile is supposed to be like that. I just don't think it always is. The Agile Manifesto. Now, if you guys have not heard of the Agile Manifesto, that is a governing document that was put together by many experts in the Agile field and in corporate America. A lot of people came together to create this document. And it's about individuals and interactions over processes and tools, which means we somehow work together cooperatively, collaboratively to get things done faster. It's about software that works over documentation. Now, this is a big leap of faith for a lot of us, especially those of us who have been doing business analysis for a long time. And we talk about the level of requirements that are needed to be successful. We need to find a way of saying, okay, I don't have to do as much. But what the right level is comes down to understanding of what goes into Agile requirements. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. And I might say something that might surprise a few people. Definitely collaboration over contract negotiation, and that's because it's an ongoing negotiation, not about the contract, but the constant collaboration that's happening where we can do and do and do until we're done without needing to be so specific all the time. And that's by the change approach. So following and responding to change versus a plan. So the Agile Manifesto, pretty straightforward in what its intent is. And here's an example of many of the types of Agile that exist. So I'm not going to go through these, but just so that you're aware of them, SAFE is not yet on this list, but certainly, and there are others coming out all the time. David's chiming in here, lack of documentation was the hardest to let go. There's trust factors there that get in our way, right? If we don't have that, but then you got to go the other side. Did anyone actually ever read our documentation when we were so thorough? I'm just going to let that one marinate for everyone. I've had people that would read my stuff, and I've had people that, yeah, not so much. I literally, just so you know, I did have one person tell me once that they did not value reading. So, yeah. A great comment. Only when someone's job was on the line did they read it. Yeah, of course. All right, so just so you guys are aware, the research that's out on the types of Agile most frequently being used, the research on the left was done a few years ago. Based on everything I can tell right now, this is the more likely scenario on side B. So 2.5 for Kanban, 11.5 for Waterfall, 33% Scrum, 8% other, 45% blended, and I expect that blended amount to go up, just so you guys are aware. And in fact, I will tell you, I think the future of almost all companies is going to be about blended methodology. It's going to be a combination of Agile and Waterfall because most companies are realizing that Agile is great for front-end systems, not so great for back-end. Really good for client-facing, forward-facing applications, not so much for ERP systems that don't have that feel. So it requires more planning for the back-end stuff, and it's harder to do Agile. I'm not saying it can't be done, but blended is the way a lot of companies are going. So if you're not familiar with the benefits of Agile overall, the whole point of Agile is to have shorter time frames, should be easier to schedule. In theory, it shouldn't cost as much. And Michelle's chiming in, harder with upgrades with third-party vendors for sure. Absolutely. Third-party vendors, really hard to get on board with Agile. Or when you're working across countries. So I was on a project in Montreal working with a group from Denmark doing Agile and a group from India doing Waterfall. You figure out the nightmare that was. Now, what's really interesting about this comment that, the intent of Agile and what it's been promoted as is that it should be cheaper, but actually most companies have found out that Agile costs more money to do it correctly. And, that's the question there. What is the version of, doing it correctly? What does it actually take? And you are correct, Angie. Infrastructures are not often built in to support Agile. So the question's coming back, why? And I'm assuming that that's based off of why does it cost more money? I'm going to hold off on answering that after I go through the next few slides because that will explain it. So hold on to that, David. Additionally, Agile should help with morale, improved morale, because we are, in teams, we're collaborative, we're working together. Doesn't always happen. I've been in a few companies recently where it's been just the opposite and people are fighting like cats and dogs. There's another reason for that, and I'll answer that question as well. The change informal and quickly addressed, that's true, it should be, unless you get into some back-end system that isn't working with the process. Inferior business relationships should be improved, providing you have a product owner that sits with you. And of course, you've got your quick development cycle, that tact, that heartbeat. That's that rhythm. That's that 2-week sprint concept that Agile uses. And Clifford, you are correct. The team is only as good as the chemistry that it's put together. Yeah. So as much as these benefits are intended to say, yes, this is why Agile works, there's still the human component. And humans are complicated monsters, right? So Agile principles in general, let's go ahead and read what's on the screen here, everyone. We've got customer satisfaction, continuous delivery of valuable software, motivated individuals who should be trusted. That's how projects are built. They're built around these motivated individuals. Changing requirements can happen even late in development. Face-to-face conversation, which means co-location, which surprisingly is like usually the one thing that I find in most companies isn't actually happening. People are not actually co-located and they say they're doing Agile. Technical excellence, good design over everything else. The software is delivered frequently in weeks rather than months. That is another thing that usually does not happen in Agile environments. And at least the companies that say they're Agile. And, the software is our measure of progress, not a deadline. And if I did a quick survey, which I'm not going to, but I would bet that if I did a quick survey and asked how many of you are doing Agile and you still have dates, I'm betting probably 90% of you too have dates. Simplicity, right? It's what's essential, what's there. Daily cooperation between our teams, and sustainable, constant pace. Sustainable, by the way, means 40-hour work weeks. How many of you are working 40-hour work weeks? Feel free to answer that or not. So the Agile principles are awesome in their intent, all right? Making them work harder to do, and that's another reason why the BA I mean 40 plus. No, I mean just 40 hours only. So here's the thing. Agile concepts, when we break it down, these are the things that make an Agile project Agile. Do you have the right team? All right, so that, again, the projects are designed around having the right team. It's not this, hey, how many people want to attend? It's only the right people. And the right team is going to be less than usually 8 people approximately, give or take. Co-located, that means everyone is sitting together. in an environment where it's open and free and has space to move. So if you have offshoring as part of your Agile team, that doesn't make it Agile. That makes it something else. Now, of course, that's how Agile was intended to start, right? So now everyone's coming out with their new definitions of what it means to be Agile, and that's fine and good. I want to stick to the purist point of view here, though, to prove out some of the questions that came out just a couple of minutes ago. The next one's very important. Is everyone broadly skilled and can help each other out? This is called T-shaped people. And I agree, Sheila, it's very hard to do with offshoring development. It's almost impossible. And when you're offshoring development, you are not Agile because you have a time delay and you have to plan out more. So it's not Agile. It's actually tiny waterfall. So T-shaped people, have you guys heard of this term before? This was the original intent of Agile. A T-shaped person, so draw like the letter T in front of you, or put your two hands in the shape of a T. All right? The base of the T, the pillar, means that you have a lot of expertise in one area, especially as a developer, a very strong set of information and ownership that you have. And then you're also, the top of the T means that you're very broad across a lot of different areas, across the entire company. So a T-shaped person is like an Uber expert, all right? And oh, that's awesome, Stephanie. I didn't know that, but it makes sense. Colleges are now stressing that their degrees are T-shaped. And, they're trying to prove out why they're better than other people. That means that they have more depth of training, they have more depth of knowledge. Well, here's the problem with T-shaped people. You're going to take all these T-shaped people that are the right people to have on the team. How many T-shaped people do you actually have in your company? We're talking about the best of the best here. These people can do anything. All right, so we create an Agile team and we put all these T-shaped people on it. And then we say, hey, let's start up another Agile team. But Agile, in the purist point of view, you work on one project and one project only. You don't go on multiple projects. So I've got all these T-shaped people on Agile Team 1. Now I'm going to have all these people on Agile Team 2. Are they as strong as Team 1? Maybe, maybe not. Now let's do a third Agile team, and a fourth Agile team, and a fifth Agile team, and a sixth, and a seventh, and an eighth, and a ninth. And you know what? Not everyone's created equal. And, your talent pool is only so deep. So Agile is intended to move very fast, very quickly, because they have people that are co-located and they have people that are super, super strong. But now we're expecting everyone to operate just like that super strong co-located team, who, by the way, their workload is so balanced, they only have to work on one project and they only get to work 40-hour work weeks. Does this make sense? Do we see now why Agile is hard to do? This is why, and so keep in mind, a BA has never been mentioned in this. Now we're going to start understanding why we need a BA on the team, because these things don't happen. Everyone needs to understand where we're at, where we start. This is called information radiators, so that means everything's on a wall in your co-located environment. And that way everyone's communicating at the right level. So all of these essential Agile concepts are critical to make Agile the most effective it can be. Now, is there anyone online tonight that's actually doing all of these things 100%? Oh, and by the way, two more pieces of information. Your product owner sits with you 24/7, and you have no budget. And actually, I'm going to add a third one, and you have no timeline. All those things together are actually what Agile was intended to do. Good answer. Yeah, right. No, nope. Okay. So we're all on the same page there, right? It's not the real world. I agree. And that's why we're having this discussion tonight, because that is a fantasy land that works not very often. There are a few companies that I've heard of that come close, potentially Bose, who makes the speakers and stuff. They're supposed to have a very good program, but they're still not pure Agile. But they do some of these concepts pretty well. All right, so let's look at the fundamentals and the responsibilities. Everyone take a look at this slide. All right, and I just want you to kind of look at all of the different things that are on here, from the concepts to the process to the leadership to your Scrum Master, QA, user experience, product owner, and developer. These are all things that are very, very similar across multiple Agile books, discussions, foundations. All right. So you can see most of them there. Now I'm going to ask you a question. What do all of those Agile concepts and practices not account for? What is not accounted for that? And yes, we will make this presentation available. In fact, I'm recording it as well. So we'll get you guys a recording as well. Documentation, no, it still kind of alludes to it, but it's not like the formal, but there's something bigger. In fact, let me just go back here. What's missing from this big picture here, folks? Yeah, ROI. Okay. Yeah, well, one could say, yeah, where's the ROI? Value analysis. All right. So we got comments are coming in fast and furious here. Analysis, ongoing support, change. Someone to tie it together. You're right, David. And who would that be? You are correct, Dan. The BA. The BA is what's missing. That's, or BSA, us, yeah, all those terms, right? This is why we need this discussion more and more, and we need to understand how things are evolving, because the BA was never intended to be talked about in Agile. It's only been recently that it's getting more attention, and that's because we don't do pure co-location. We don't do 2-week sprints. We still have deadlines. You know, we don't get our product owner sitting with us 24/7. So you guys tell me, what do you think a BA does on an Agile project? What they do on Waterfall comes in, Michelle, strongly, very quickly. All the thinking jobs. that might get you hit, depending on who you're talking to, but I love it. Whatever is needed, right? Documentation, help keep the team moving. Some teams think that the BA is just for writing requirements, which you don't have in Agile. So what's interesting about that is it's how people look at Agile. So we're going to come back to that comment in a little bit, because I think that what's surprising is when we get into Agile properly, people don't realize what's there because the terms are different. Gathers and analyzes initial requirements for more specific documentation, coordinate the team, helps with communication between the different teams. The stories are the requirements. Yep, that's true. All right, and there's actually more to it than that. So I'm going to go all the way back to what they do on Waterfall that Michelle said. And the question is how much of that do you do? And so BAs can add value in a lot of different ways. So let's start exploring some of that and how it starts translating. So here's the deal. A BA in an Agile environment elicits new stories. They hold workshops, they create new stories, they prioritize, they decompose, they manage product scope, they analyze rules, process data. They just do pretty much everything that they used to, just differently. So they actually, everything that you've ever learned in a waterfall environment, which would include negotiation and arbitration for Batman and Superman, right? And hostage negotiation. And if you guys have never seen me present before, I do make the comment about BAs have to know hostage negotiation techniques, which is absolutely true, by the way. You should go read up on it. All the techniques that are used in hostage negotiation are totally used in requirements management. Any one of you could become a hostage negotiator. You just wouldn't want to because they only make $55,000 a year. It's law enforcement. So that's a good question. I don't know whose side Wonder Woman's on. Probably her own. But yeah, you're correct, Sheila. We're the moms, right? We're the parent figure. We have to do all of that stuff. And one of the big things that I keep running into are BAs that have never done waterfall before. They come in, they're brand new to Agile, and they think that Agile is just writing user stories. And what a BA actually needs to bring to the table is everything you've ever learned classically. And find that the BAs that I find are succeeding the best in an Agile environment are the ones that have more waterfall background, as long as you can learn to let go of too much documentation or other concepts. So things to think about. All right, so here's another reason why a BA is needed, because it's all about Scrum or Fall. It's Wagile. It's hybridization. So isn't requirements management done by the Scrum Master? No. Scrum Master is your relationship manager, your person that is guiding the team. Requirements management should really be done by the BA working with a product owner. Technically, it's the responsibility of the product owner, but most companies don't have product owners that sit with the team 24/7. There's a large chunk of what goes into a product owner role that actually is business analysis. And one of the big hybridizations that's happening in a lot of organizations right now is a new BA, PO, or what we call a BAPO. Or you can call them a POBA, whatever you want to call them, but it's a hybridized role. A little bit more on that later. If a Scrum Master is doing it in your environment, I would wonder how they have time to do it, because there should be a lot of other things that the Scrum Master should be facilitating. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in the Scrum Master role that's BA related as well, but ultimately requirements management is done by the BA, and the Scrum Master is just facilitating the results. All right, so let's look at a couple of things here. We've got our typical Scrum. Now this may look a little different for you depending on your environment, but this is kind of a typical approach for Scrum. You start with your product backlog, and that's of course where all your user stories are. You've got release planning. That's going to be overarching to your entire project. Then you've got individual sprints that you have to plan. That's all about pulling from that product backlog. You're going to have your sprint backlog for that sprint release, which is typically 2 weeks, although I recently ran into a company that is now doing 1 week sprints. I will repeat that, 1 week sprints. I do run into 3 and 4 week sprints a lot these days. And you've got your daily stand-ups, and that's going to get you to your sprint release, which then gets you to your review, which of course is your retrospective or your lessons learned. So pretty straightforward as a process, and we do this in our 2 weeks over and over and over again until we're done. So within this process now, let's look at what can a BA do to add value, besides just saying that the BA does everything that they did in Waterfall, because it's true, but we need to focus in on the biggest pieces. So when I look at it, we've got kind of a beginning to what I will call a middle. So there's the define the product vision, which should be happening from your product owner. But this is where the strategic enterprise analysis happens. So in some organizations, this will still be a BA helping out to do this, and should be. If you think in terms of your business case, this is really where that's happening. It's just a different level for Agile. Your user roles and personas, that's where we're looking at our stakeholder analysis that's specific to Agile. Then we've got our elicitation that the BA should be a huge help in. And then your product backlog management is where you're managing all of your user stories. Your card management is going to get into your acceptance criteria. And those are the main areas where a BA can add some help. And we're going to go over these at a high level. And when we're done in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so, we'll open it up for questions. So I'm going to start actually with the product backlog management, or the development of it, sorry. And I'm going to work our way kind of a little forward and then backwards because it just makes more sense. So let's just start off with the basics. The product backlog is where all your user stories comes from. Now, typically your product owner should be the person that's providing a lot of this information and coming up with user stories. Keep in mind, in an agile environment, the entire team can provide user stories. Anyone on the team can provide a user story. It's not limited to the product owner. It's not limited to the BA. What is important is that the BA manages this backlog closely with your product owner, especially if the product owner doesn't sit with the team every day. And again, most companies I go into, the product owner doesn't exist or doesn't sit with the team. So the BA has to be the first lieutenant of the product owner, running interference, being that liaison that a BA has always been intended to do between the product owner and the rest of the team. And they will be constantly working in this backlog. Now, what's important is if this is your role, you need to make sure that everyone on the team tells you when they've added a user story. If you have a product backlog that is visible like this on a wall, it's easy to see. But a lot of companies are using Top Team or Blueprint or Rally or Jira or some other tool to capture their user stories. And when someone adds a new user story, you don't get notified right away, which makes the BA's job really hard. So I do implore you as BAs, make sure you set some good ground rules for how user stories are created and when they tell you so that you can manage the backlog better. All right. In addition, that of course is just the idea of saying, hey, that's our stakeholder requirements, our user requirements. You can call them cards, you can call them user requirements, you can call them stories. I don't care what you call them. At the end of the day, it's from the user perspective. That's what all of these things are. And so you are talking about progressive elaboration of requirements. We have user requirements. We're going to have to get to functional and non-functional, but the backlog is only about the user perspective. And so your job is to capture these user stories, whether it's on a card or a Post-it that's stuck on a wall or in an Excel template, or this is a picture of Jira up here on the top right as a tool. Regardless of how they get captured as a BA, you should be managing that and working with your product owner. Then, of course, just to make sure everyone knows, a user story, one sentence, what the user needs, it's high level, and it's not supposed to give you everything you need. All right, so as a provider, I need to be able to see a list of participating members so I can invoice correctly. Now, the BA and me immediately says, I don't know what correctly means, and I don't know when it's going to happen, and I don't know 97 other things. And in Agile, that's okay, because we need to get our story down to a workable level at some point, but we can start with larger stories that provides us the opportunity to have conversations. Where the BA adds value on the team is pushing these stories out to drive more conversations with the product owner to explore where it needs to go and organize them in such a way that it makes it easier for the development team by the time it gets there. If the development team ends up asking too many questions, the BA is probably not doing enough. You need to analyze this stuff. You should know the data. You should know the process going into it before you start working in a sprint. All of that stuff should be done pre-sprint, all based off of this conversation of the user story with your product owner. So if that's what it's intended to be, what are the biggest roadblocks to user stories that you guys run into? What's the roadblocks you guys run into? Everyone's typing furiously, I'm sure. Not enough detail, okay. Yep, definitely is the case. Product owner does not know really what they want. They're not completely sure. Developers keep silent until we start the sprint. That is a huge problem. So one of the things that BAs can do is have mini meetings prior to the sprint. Go test it out with a developer. Go have conversations with QA. Keeping the team going. Several of you said that earlier. That's one of the ways BAs do it. Lack of a true product owner that understands, right? Big problem. BA doesn't have the domain knowledge, all right? Yeah, and that can be a problem too. So you have to go out and learn it very quickly. Testable acceptance criteria. Conflicting stories. All right, user stories written by development for development as a user. Okay, that's just wrong. That actually is one of the things that we need to guard against, and that if you see that, you actually need to reject that user story. You need to have it rewritten, and that's part of the process. Developer transition to order tracker or tacker. Not a true resource. I think I know what you meant, though. BA doesn't have authority in higher visibility projects to make decisions. That is a problem. Oh, order taker. Yeah, that makes total sense now, Clifford. Thank you. And when you don't have that authority, that's why you have to be really tight with your product owner. And it's a problem if, in fact, your product owner is not there and you're playing the role of the product owner, but you don't have the authority to make the decisions. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so there's lots of roadblocks to user stories. So the BA has an opportunity to help out in all of those areas, though. So you can schedule another meeting. You have to make sure that the stories don't conflict. You need to analyze. Much like we would if we just had our Word document full of requirements, we're looking at those, making sure that they don't conflict. We're making sure that they have acceptable testing criteria. We're making sure that we get the domain knowledge to do what we need to do. We need to make sure that the product owner actually figures out what they need. We've got to talk to them. We've got to make sure our developers don't stay silent. We've got to do all of these things. We just don't often, in an agile environment, a lot of people think that those things don't happen. They haven't been taught yet that the BA still has to do all those things. So good comment here coming in from Susie. The user story should be from a user's point of view, but when the story is a technical one, it's hard to write it. Agreed. So the question is, should you have a user story? Now, this is kind of out of scope for our conversation tonight, but there's such a thing as tech cards. There are spike cards that technical resources can do to do research on, but there's also technical cards that need to support the environment that have nothing to do with the user. So don't be afraid to have the team do some tech cards. Question coming in, should developers be involved after stories are written? I think the developer, or before for that matter, I think the answer to both is yes. Much like I would in a waterfall environment, I mean, if I need something researched in advance, I'm going to go share that story with them so they can provide input. This is supposed to be a collaboration, and people get so hung up on, oh, it's in the sprint. The reality is we've estimated a certain amount of time for exploring and other things. We know how much time it takes us to get our work done. The only way we're going to figure out is how to plan for the overall release if we have more conversations. So whether it's in a stand-up, saying, hey, I need 10 minutes of someone's time today to talk about some user stories for the future, or just scheduling something with them, make it transparent and get them involved. Because honestly, that collaboration between the BA and the development team can, speed things up. Okay, good. Really good, everyone. Awesome. So just to make sure that everyone's heard of this before, has everyone done Invest before? This is how you measure whether or not your user story is a good user story. Okay, got some yeses coming in. That's awesome. This really isn't any different than when we would look at requirements quality for a waterfall environment, where it's complete, consistent, unambiguous, feasible, necessary, prioritized. I've also got a couple of no's coming in. So Invest is a way of making sure that your user story is accurate, is appropriate. So We don't really have time to go into the criteria in depth tonight, but for those of you that have not really looked at this before, make sure you have criteria for what makes a good user story, because that's going to be the measurement. It's a myth that Agile doesn't have standards, and it's a myth that Agile doesn't have documentation. Agile actually is incredibly structured, has documentation, it just doesn't have as much as Waterfall. And it still has standards like Invest. It still has quality checks. So all those things still have to happen. All right. So a lot of involvement from the BA in the user story world. There's also involvement when we get to acceptance criteria. So what do you guys think acceptance criteria is? And then we'll talk about how the BA really fits into the acceptance criteria. Okay, so what the product owner wants as a final product. Similar to business requirements at a high level. Any other thoughts what acceptance criteria is? Did the story get completed, and if so, how can you prove its acceptance criteria? A measure of what is needed to sign off from the product owner. All these are very typical answers that I get, by the way. How well the product matches the user story. All right. So here's the surprise. Y'all ready for it? Acceptance criteria are functional and non-functional requirements. This is the thing that a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people look at acceptance criteria and a lot of people think it's just how you test the user story. Well, that's there, it's present, but actually testing is going to test the acceptance criteria that you said needs to be there. All acceptance criteria is a combination of functional and non-functional requirements that support the user story. Acceptance criteria is a veiled approach to less documentation so that we don't have to do a lot of documentation on what goes into them. We keep it simple, but the reality is everything that you say has to be in place to support that user. Most of it is functional and a good chunk of it is non-functional. Now, if you don't know what functional and non-functional requirements are, that's a very typical waterfall concept about what goes into that. Functional requirements are all those things that generally your business partners can see. So they can see screens and reports and data, they can see information. Non-functional are the environmental conditions that have to operate to keep those functional requirements working, like security, availability, maintainability, operability. Anything ending in -ity is literally a non-functional requirement. Question coming in. Do you ever see teams writing functional and non-functional requirements and then build stories on how those will be accomplished? Of course, because in some cases, it's easier to point out the functions that need to happen. People generally come in with a preconceived notion, right, of what they expect the final product to be. The danger of that is, especially if our product owner doesn't really know what they need, we might actually then be developing the wrong user stories to put that stuff in place. It's kind of a roadmap for people, absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we've got to make sure that it's the right thing for people. So acceptance criteria, one of the other things you need to be aware of is every time you write something in acceptance criteria, that could generate a new user story. Now, you don't want a new user story for every field, right? Let me give you a classic example. If I had a user story that says I want to be able to log in to the system to manage my personal information so that I can pay for things or whatever, I don't know, some kind of benefit that needs to be there. I don't want a user story for I want to be able to add my first name. I want to be able to add my last name. Even though those are data pieces, the acceptance criteria is going to be that that personal information is valid. And then we're going to talk about it and what goes into it. So it still stays at a fairly high level, but sometimes your acceptance criteria means that you do need an entire other user story. So it's not like you've got 10 user stories here. You could have hundreds depending on the size of the project. You just don't want to do user stories at the individual field level. Usually it's groups. All right, so we answered that question, so I guess we don't need to do that one. If we look at defining acceptance criteria, it's for the understanding of our users and our developers and our QA. That's why they need it. It's functional and non-functional requirements. It's what's expected, right? How it's going to implement. Always attached to the individual user story. So user story will have acceptance criteria off of that. And it should be written prior to development. This is where a BA helps out, especially if a product owner doesn't know. We write that acceptance criteria before the sprint. It's all done. I'll answer that question in just a second. And also done prior to sizing, and it's the what, not the how. So I don't put things in there like click the OK button, that's design. But I need to say that the transaction's been completed. So you have to figure out what that is. And by the way, acceptance criteria, if you got 10, it's too many. Usually the average is somewhere between 4 and 6 pieces of acceptance criteria. Question coming in, can you use Agile with a third-party vendor without having a design document to hold their feet to the fire? So that in itself, right, is always the question. How do you get the third-party vendor to play nicely at the table and actually still meet the dates? If we were in a pure Agile environment, we wouldn't have a date. We would just keep going on until we felt the product was correct. But we're in America, and we always have dates and we have budgets. So this is where a BA can help again. I think that the BA can do some supplementary documentation for third parties to make sure that that happens, especially if that third-party vendor is not co-located with us. And so I think there's some, that's something you have to kind of explore through the process. But I would work with the entire team before I even started the project to make sure that we knew exactly what we would and would not produce. That way there's no wiggle room. That's a great question. And just so you guys know, there's different kinds of acceptance criteria. There's the checklist, which is literally just a checklist of our functional, non-functional requirements. And there's also what's known as Gherkin. Has anyone done Gherkin before? It's gaining a lot of traction for DevOps approaches, development operations. Just started, okay. So everyone can talk to David locally there. He's the new expert. It's similar. Sorry, David, didn't mean to put you on the spot there. It is an approach similar to the user story. Rather than as a I want so that, it uses a given when then statement. Given that this has happened, when this happens, then this will be the expected result. It's definitely loved by testers, and DevOps approaches are feeling like it's the way to go. It does help with automation of testing as well. So just so you guys are aware of it, nothing more to talk about it tonight, but that's where a BA can help. And additionally, BAs need to be helping a lot in analysis of our stakeholders and elicitation. I'm going to keep this one very short. You're correct, Michelle. They do sound like mini use cases. They act that way. Gherkin very much feels like mini use cases. The one thing I'm going to caution is if you do Gherkin, and make sure whoever's doing the QA understands that that's not the only thing you test. There's so much more to test outside of just the acceptance criteria. So people get the same thing that people use cases for years for. They would test only the use case, but that only tests the interaction between the people and the system. So it's not a full test. Anyway, the big thing I want to point out here is that in an Agile environment, BAs elicit differently. And if you're not familiar with collaboration games, it's a very modern approach to elicitation. Hopefully someday you'll get to take one of my classes. I have what's called the Badass BA Techniques class. And I don't know if you guys knew, but there's really close to 400 techniques in analysis. The BA BOK covers 53. And in my Badass Techniques class, we cover about 80 really cool, amazing ones that do not exist in the BA BOK. Modern day BAs for Agile will use a lot of these collaboration games. They're fun, they're interesting, they get a lot of information out quickly. So maybe someday I'll come back to another webinar, show you a couple of them. But modern approaches to eliciting versus the standard old interviews and things. All right, so then a few more words, and then we're going to open it up to lots of questions here, because we do need to talk about the whole product owner piece. All right, oops, going too far, sorry. All right, so scope and the product owner, all right? So the product owner, to me, honestly, if I was on a waterfall project, I would put my face in the center there as the BA. And as a BA, I would interface with the customers and the project manager and the team and sponsors and everyone else. But it's the product owner now that has that position. And that's because they're supposed to own the product and they're supposed to own the requirements. I don't know why some of those team members are angry. They just are. And so there's a strong correlation between what a BA and a product owner do because there's a lot of similarities. If we look at this list here, this is a list of everything the product owner is supposed to be an owner of. Now, if you look at this list, how many can you check off that you think the BA could do? And certainly when I look at this list, if this is the role of the PO has to own all these things, now we understand why they're supposed to sit with the team 24/7. And I agree, Susan, many, if not most. I think a BA could do a good majority of these things. Where they're going to get caught up, right, is in ultimate decision making. Going to be harder for a BA to have that authority. All right. Yep. Good. So our product owner needs to ask their supervisor, how does this impact Agile? I'm not sure where you're coming from that comment, David. Maybe I'm missing something. Are you saying that the product owner doesn't have authority? Or that they're not involved with your teams 24/7? Or, sorry if I'm not reading your comment correctly. Anyway, so product owners have to be responsible for a lot, and in most companies, we don't get the product owner 24/7, so the BA needs to take a chunk of this, all right? And this is where we're getting to that hybridized. So the BAPOs, the POBAs, you know, and some people refer to themselves as a PMBACA, PM, BA, QA. So this is a very big thing. Is there anyone that's doing oh, okay, I see. Before you can proceed on a story, she needs to talk to her supervisor. Well, then that person is not a product owner. Because product owners, I'm going to go back here, product owners do the vision and the roadmap, and this sounds like it's being done by someone above them. You know, this person's supposed to have in-depth knowledge. This person's supposed to have go, no to go decisions. This person's supposed to manage all that stuff. So, you know, this explains another reason why Agile doesn't work in all these cases, right? So how many people are there? Is there anyone online tonight that actually is doing a product owner / BA hybrid? Okay, ouch. That's all I'm going to say to that, Sheila. So I've got people coming to meetings and constantly IMing and then answering emails and then misses key items. Yeah, so you know, these people have to be present. Okay, so we got a couple of people that's doing proxy. Be aware that this is a big trend, and lots of companies are moving to this BA becoming a proxy for the PO. Now, some companies are going to have these titles different. So product manager versus product owner. In some organizations, the product manager is higher than the product owner. In some cases, it's a product owner is higher than a product manager. Regardless of the title, you can fill it in however. Your product owner might be the vision, mission, value prop, release, sign-off, stakeholder management at a high level, and they don't show up all the time. The proxy is the product manager title that the BA is doing, which is all the day-to-day stuff, the knowledge of the team, the sprint sign-off, other things. So a BA is getting a lot of that kind of stuff. The problem with this is that the BA doesn't have authority, so decisions usually can't be made quickly. So it sounds like Sheila is a hybrid. And there's pros and cons to that, right? So just a comment from Ken Schwaber from the Scrum Guide. The product owner is the one and only one person responsible for managing the product backlog and ensuring the value of the work the team performs. This person maintains the product backlog and ensures that it's visible to everyone. Basically what they're saying is, oh, awesome. So Trent has done that role for a very long time. If this person isn't the person doing it all, basically what they're saying is that Agile will suffer and not do as well. And I can see their point. Having said that, the reality is most companies aren't set up to be successful that way, and the business is never going to yield that kind of resource consistently. It just doesn't work. There's too many projects to get through, so the hybridization has to happen. And I'm sure there'll be some other questions about that, and we'll come back to it here in just a minute. Just a couple other things that the vision is really where your business case starts. The BA Bach talks about your business model canvas. This is a great way of starting off the vision, where it looks at what the value proposition is. And I'm showing this to you for a really good reason to talk about what happens in Agile. Once you understand that value prop of what we are going to do, we figure out our key partners, the activities that are going to tell us how we'll do it, the resources we need to make it happen, the interactions with the customers, those are documented, distribution channels, customer segments, the cost structure, the ROI, revenue streams. It's business case very forward. Now, if we look at what's supposed to happen in Agile, and I run into very few companies that use this, there's an Agile vision board, and it's got less stuff, but actually every single one of these has multiple pieces of the business model canvas. So it's just a more concise view. And at the end of the day, what we're really saying is that the product owner should be involved with the business case. And if you don't have a business case, then as a BA, you should probably be banging down the door to find out, why are we doing this without a business case? What's the vision? We need to measure to something. So the reality is the BA fits into a lot of areas. The BA could do a good chunk of the product owner role. The BA should be involved with the design. The BA should be having meetings more frequently. The BA still needs to do data. The BA still needs to do process. The BA does need to do modern day elicitation, modern collaborative techniques, because the old ones don't work so well. The BA needs to definitely do stakeholder analysis. So there's actually a huge many reasons for why BAs need to be involved in Agile projects. And that's just scratching the surface of these 50 pages in the last 65 minutes that we've been going through. Or not 65, I guess close to 75. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to open it up to whatever questions you have at all. Just the final thought from this is, a BA adds value to Agile projects by doing everything they did before, just in a microcosm of their former waterfall life. And that explains it pretty darn well. You have to figure out how much you can do without doing too much. Maybe you only show one small piece of the process. We're not going to document 97 functional requirements. but we'll do some acceptance criteria that mimics it. We're still going to need to do a mock-up. There's still things we need to do, but we have to do it in a much smaller version. All right. Any questions at all? You guys have had great comments and interactions throughout. Now for the next 15 minutes, you can ask me anything you want at all. I'm just going to throw that out there to whatever you guys would like to ask. Whether it's about Agile or other things, I'm completely open to it. Industry resource here, so feel free to ping me. Until I get a question, then I will just point out that, hey, I finally got my book out, The Badass Business Analyst, Little Slices of Big Truths. You can get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and iTunes for 10 bucks, or you can go to my website and you can get a signed copy. Paper costs a lot more though. So question, can you expand more on the technical cards? Absolutely. So technical cards are one style of card. There's tech cards, there's spike cards, there's the user story, or what we call the invest card. The tech card is there to when a user story makes no sense to write. So let's say that there's some kind of support thing that needs to happen. And I will say that this usually happens the most in Sprint Zero. Sprint Zero is your very first sprint. That's usually a lot of setup or infrastructure things that need to happen before you can move forward. And the user honestly isn't going to have a story because they're not going to say, hey, as a user, I need you to create a shell of a website so that eventually I can have a website I can go to so I can log in and buy product. It doesn't make sense. And we don't want to reuse that user story later. Oh, Susie, you bought my book. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. It will sound and read a lot like I speak. So the tech cards, very important, and it's a way of helping keep the development team focused on that other stuff that the users don't care about, but they need to track and manage to. Does that make sense, Stephanie? So anything that supports the environment, right? That's what those tech cards are for outside of the user experience. All right, so this one's a little longer. Let's see what we got here. I'm on a committee tasked with defining key performance indicators for Agile BAs. Awesome. Our job for Waterfall was easy, for Agile not so much. Do you have any experience with defining KPIs or measurable success criteria for the BA role in Agile? Well, in order to do that, I would have to ask you several questions first. So my first question would be, do you still have timelines? Have you defined exactly what acceptable criteria is for your user stories? Because if the user stories are not at a workable level and they're impeding sprints, I can measure that. I can actually look at that because the sprint was not at the lowest denominator for the user story that I was using, which meant it's harder for our development team to work off of. And so you've got to look at all those things. And because the BA can add value in all these other ways, I think what you need to do is just put on a mini waterfall hat. Okay, so your answer is yes, timelines, acceptance criteria, yes, but we often change it as we go. So then, of course, I'm going to follow that up with it. You know, what do you mean by changing it? Are you saying that you change the timeline? So if you change the timeline, and in theory, that's completely acceptable in Agile, right? To say that, oh, we're going to move it. If no one's being penalized for the changed timeline and everyone agrees to move it, the BA can't be dinged, so technically their requirements are on time. So I would have to look at the reasons of why we're allowed to change a timeline. Then from an acceptance criteria perspective, you know, there's such a thing as too much. And if the acceptance criteria, and I'm looking at your comment here, we can always add to acceptance criteria. If you're always adding to it, you're technically introducing scope in a sprint. because more acceptance criteria means it's more that the development team has to code for, or that the QA group has to test for. So I would say again that the acceptance criteria needs to be just a few pieces, 4 to 6, not tons. And if it is, then the user stories aren't at a low enough workable level. I mean, certainly those are the areas that I would start with. Agile's intended to be flexible. Agile's intended to be workable. And so therefore, a lot of it comes down to subjective behaviors, not objective behaviors. And so the real question that, you change acceptance criteria, not timelines. Okay. Well, if you're not changing timelines, then you've got a good measurement there. But if you're changing acceptance criteria as well, then I'm going to say that the BA is not doing a good enough job, because the acceptance criteria should not change based off of the user story written. Again, it's functional and non-functional requirements that support that user story. So I would be betting that a lot of your user stories that you're working on are too big. And this is a hard thing to get to. All right, good. So start there. You can always ping me later, bob@bobtheba.com if you want more. All right. Of all the user story apps you've seen in the industry, which do you feel is the best for a waterfall shop transitioning to Agile for front-end systems? Here's, surprisingly, I'm a big fan of tools, but here's the thing. A fool with a tool is still a fool if it doesn't know how to use it. I find that in Agile, I actually don't like a tool. I have a hard time with tools in Agile. I took a long time in my career to get up to speed on Agile and liking it where I love it and I can work really well with it. I don't like tools for Agile. I think everything should be on boards, public, out in front. Your backlog should be out there on a wall. Your lessons learned from the previous sprint should be on a wall. I think tools slow down Agile. And I think tools don't give you the accountability you need. The walls are very public and the tools hide things. Having said that, I'm not fond of tools that allow you to add tons of documentation underneath things. So a simpler tool like Jira would probably be a tool that I would go with before I went with something else, because Jira is not structured to do a whole lot. It's just blobs. So people are not as enticed to add lots of stuff they shouldn't. Do you have any advice on how to split up large stories and criteria for what you keep in one story and what you move to another? Yes, it's called story mapping. So if you've not done story mapping before, think in terms of classic waterfall functional decomposition diagram, where you are breaking things down from higher levels to lower levels, just like an org chart. You've got your president of the company, then you got your VPs, then you got your directors, then your managers, then your peons, and so on and so on. You start with your themes. So I might have a theme of registration. Then I'm going to have a bunch of epic stories underneath that theme. And underneath those epic stories, I'm going to have stories breaking down. So I'm constantly using this functional decomposition or story map to break down and split up the stories. And by doing so, it will give me better visibility. I'll get better at breaking down those stories from the large ones into smaller ones. So that's really where I would start with that. Hopefully that made sense. Let's see where we're going here. Oh, of course, coming back to David, we create a new story when we add more acceptance criteria. And you should, but that means your acceptance criteria was too much, and yeah. And I'm going to go back here. Okay, so you're not, okay, thank you, Michelle. I'm getting around to it eventually. You can't because you're not true Agile. Your team is not co-located. This is the tool question I had previously. So at that point, then I would look at a tool like Jira, which I know a lot of companies have gone to. There's a free version of Rally, but the problem I have with Rally is that it does allow you to put a lot of stuff in there you shouldn't. And story mapping is definitely, glad you're looking at that too. Story mapping is a huge thing to add to that. All right, 7:23, I'm caught up on the current questions. What else do you guys have? Anything at all? Was this helpful tonight to talk about this stuff? Good, awesome. Oh, you're very kind, thank you. You know, if you got some takeaways, then that's important. I'm glad, Sue. Awesome. How do you feel about the project manager acting as the product manager? Question coming in. So, I'm like recording and I'm live, so I want to be careful what I say here. Here's the reality. There are different skill sets for different people, all right? And at the end of the day, what we're talking about when we're getting into product management is whoever's in that role has to have strong relationship skills. And if that product manager has strong relationship skills, then fine. It's just another way of saying it's a different hybrid. All right. So at the end of the day, though, anyone working with that PO, PM, product manager style role, people skills are very, very important. So that's how I'm going to answer that. Beyond that, what role does it? I mean, every company is going to do it differently. Next question, any guidelines of what should be retained for auditing purposes? Always depends on the company, right? So some companies will say that you can take your cards from a wall and take pictures and put them on a LAN. Others will say they have to be in a tool because the regulation is that it needs to be physically captured somehow. So some organizations will not allow the wall concept, right? The paper concept that can be easily thrown away. So I would go to your underwriting or legal team, or if you've got an internal compliance team, ask them of what is important to your organization to make sure that you guys aren't breaking any rules. And if you have none of those things, then it's a question of how do you want to reuse these things? How do you want to be able to create visibility to them in the long term? Rally is now ALM, right? You know, I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. I have not kept up with it. It probably is. There's so many, this is the thing. I gave up a few years ago because I used to try to keep track of all the tools, and it seemed like every year 3 or 4 different tools were merging, and people were quitting one tool vendor and creating their own tool. It's so competitive, it's hard to keep track. All right, so David, for his audit purposes, they moved them from the tool to a Word document for final documentation. And Dan is confirming that Rally is now, of course, ALM. So Rally, that means Rally's probably not free anymore, because back in the days when I used it, Rally was free. Or they'll probably have a free version that, then you got to buy more licensing. But I do like David's suggestion, if you've got to have a final, then move it all to Word, chuck it in there, export it. Some will do it in Excel, that way they can export it to a testing tool. Awesome. A couple of minutes left if you've got any other questions. Everything is fair game for Bob the BA. Thank you, Sheila. Much appreciated. We do, with the focus away from documentation, do you have any recommendation to onboard new team members? And thank you, Charles. Much appreciated. Here's the thing. Thank you, Susan. For onboarding new team members, the first thing I'm going to do is find out exactly what kind of experience they have. Because if they only have Agile user story writing experience, the first thing I'm going to do is get them training to make sure they understand how to do process and data, and they need to understand all that stuff. In order to make the user stories viable, you need to have analysis skills. So I would definitely be onboarding them in a way that to make sure that they understood how waterfall works, so that they still do the analysis, even if it's not formally documented, because they are going to have to translate and tell developers things. And they're going to have to answer questions about things that they won't know unless they analyze it. And I see that being a big roadblock for a lot of people that are new to Agile. You know, they write the user story and then they really don't understand the impact. They don't understand the dependencies. They don't understand the interfaces. They don't understand what the big picture is. And this little user story is so trees, not forest. So you got to have both. That's the way I would onboard them. Oh, let's go with domain knowledge. Oh, domain knowledge, Trent, dive in, get your feet dirty, get your fingers dirty, shove the pie in your face. That's the only way to learn. Thank you, Sue. Domain knowledge is one of those things that you've got to be willing to immerse yourself in it as fast as you can. I would be asking the product owner to sit down with me and brain drain. Give me everything you can. Give me every manual, give me whatever, because domain knowledge for some people has been developed over, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? They've got the experience. For people that don't have it, the only way to get it is to read and ask questions as much as you can. There's just no good way. We haven't developed the download the chip in our brain yet. All right, well, it's technically 7:30, which means there's a hamburger somewhere out there waiting with my name on it. You guys, thank you so much for inviting me into your world, and hopefully I'll get to come down to St. Louis someday and see you guys in person, and because I would love that. And we'll do a webinar at some point in the future again too. So you guys, I'll make sure this recording gets out to you guys, and we'll get the presentation out to you as well. And you guys have a fantastic evening. All right, everyone, thank you so much. And with that, we will, Michelle, is there anything you would like to say before we chime off here?
Am I unmuted?
Nope, you are good.
No, just big thanks to Bob for agreeing. It was fantastic. I really appreciate your time.
Awesome, thank you. All right, you guys take care. Have a great one. We'll see you in the future sometime. Bye-bye.